Okay, what do you think, Tyler? Think we
I
should
think we're good.
start?
Yeah, go for it.
Let's start. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very excited that you're here, and we're trying to really help everyone understand what's going on with building performance standards, also known as BPS. So this is another acronym for everyone to get under their belt because it's coming and we really all need to understand it. And we're kind of looking at this of why should I care? Why should you care? Why should I care? What we're going to talk about, we're going to have some introductions about who I am and Tyler, and then what are building performance standards and why we care, a compliance roadmap to help you understand what's coming down the pipe, some local examples also to help you understand what this is all about, and then a little bit more on tax incentives and tax benefits that come about that are outstanding right now, and then feel free that we're going to have some questions and answers. So put those questions into the chat. We'd love to answer any questions that come up. So I'm Marika Erdely, founder and CEO of Green Economy. Green Economy is an energy and consulting company. I come from a world of accounting, actually. I'm a financial executive I was one for like 30 years. So really come from a financial perspective. And interestingly enough, energy is numbers and so is accounting. So it kind of fits in my head, but that's where I come from. Green Economy is really our whole goal here at Green Economy is to help real estate owners understand their energy and water use, identify waste, and reduce that energy and water costs. We prepare a lot of the benchmarking reports that we're going to be talking about today for these nationwide energy and water compliance reporting requirements. We also conduct energy and water audits to improve asset value. We also do a lot of shadow metering, also known as energy monitoring, to identify peaks and waste for those science-based target goals that people have. We're also into solar PV and battery consulting, very much on the financial side with tax benefits and utility incentives. Are there any out there? And we are contractors, so we do the work as well in buildings. And that's who we are. So how about you, Tyler? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Tyler Stafford. I'm Business Development Director for Abraxas Energy Consulting. I've been with the company in the industry for about 12 years. Abraxas Energy is a nationwide company delivering energy solutions across all sectors. We work commercial, industrial, very heavy in healthcare, higher education, multifamily, the whole list is on the screen there. And any building type, any size, we cover it. We've also done some international work as well. So the company by itself, Abraxas Energy, has been around since 2001. I'll touch on that on the next slide. But myself, I hold a Bachelor's of Science degree from California Polytechnic SLO, or San Luis Obispo, for those that don't know where that is. And very active in the Association of Energy Engineers, or AEE, and the National Association of Energy Services Companies, NIESCO, as well as a number of other organizations within our engineering team as well. Abraxas Energy. So like I mentioned, Abraxas has been around since 2001. We have really focused on being a trusted partner to all our clients in the energy efficiency space, focusing again on reducing operating costs and providing our expertise to provide these practical energy solutions to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings or building set. Very similar to Green Economy, energy audits is one of our core focuses here. Retro commissioning or commissioning and measurement verification for all different sectors, including the federal government, really being a key partner for energy services companies, utilities, and commercial customers. Very similar to Green Economy as well, we do have a contractor's license in the state of California as reciprocity in a number of other states, focusing on construction management support, bid package development, working with contractors throughout commissioning of scopes of projects, and also doing commissioning of energy efficiency retrofits ourselves. And then we also provide our customers and consultants that we work with utility bill tracking software and ongoing M&V support for energy services companies on their projects, whether that's a municipal project, the federal government project, commercial project, all in the same. Abraxas in January of 2004 was also acquired by Hillman Consulting, which is a environmental due diligence company. So as part of the Hillman family of companies, we've also expanded our suite of services to include this national environmental and construction risk services. Again, expanding our efforts and our capabilities to really be more comprehensive across the entire as-built environment. That is Abraxas and Hillman. Next slide.
Yeah, great. All right, so building performance standards, why should we care? And what are they? So what are they? So think of it as it's a set of standards to reduce carbon emissions in buildings by improving energy, gas, and water use and peak demand. That's that KW, peak demand. Carbon is made up of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and then the fluorocarbons, which are also hydrocarbons, which are also refrigerants. So it's trying to reduce those emissions that are coming out of buildings. They require, these targets are going to require performance targets, right? So they're going to say, you have to get down to this certain level in order to continually improve the and reduce the emissions coming out of your property, right? Why is this happening? Because approximately 40% of the emissions that go out into the atmosphere are coming from commercial buildings. So this is an effort to help building owners understand how their buildings, what level of emissions are coming out, and then how do they improve them to reduce those emission levels.
And one of the key things I wanted to highlight too on that previous slide is, building performance standards. This is a key buzzword we're hearing a lot more of lately. It's been around for a long time. This isn't something new, but we're starting to see more and more of that. One of the leading kind of drivers of that is obviously state and local, government pushing it forward. But there's also organizations that are really involved in that. And one of the ones that was highlighted on the previous page, IMT, Institute for Market Transformation, does a really great job of summarizing building performance standards. And a lot of the presentation that we're going to touch on here actually is information pulled from IMT. So very helpful if you guys want to circle back on that following the presentation. I believe we are going to share this like we said. So we can discuss that further as we go into this presentation, but I did want to touch on that. Go ahead. Okay, so again, why should we all care, or why should we be focused on building performance standards? What are they? Why is it important? Everybody wants to think that it's just a check the box. That's a very common thing that we're seeing. It's like, this is just a check the box. Why are we doing this? But building performance standards actually do have some positive aspects to them. And depending on if you're a building owner, a building manager, all of these boxes play into that, why should we care? So compared to typical buildings, high performance buildings save an average of 60 cents per rentable square foot on O&M expenses annually. So that's a pretty big, a savings, right, that we're focusing on. And then from the sales side, as we start talking about the efficiency premium and, you're selling buildings or you're holding buildings, sale prices are anywhere from 1 to 31% higher, depending on, is it a high efficiency building? Where does it stack up in that performance stack? Rental premiums, again, if you're a building manager or a landlord or holding buildings for tenants, premiums could be anywhere from 3 to 16% higher. And then also in that sense, you might have the argument, well, my tenants pay, all of the costs. Why do I care? Well, occupancy levels or rentability, again, is up 10% higher because of the, your tenants are getting a more efficient building. They do care. So it is important. Again, all of these things are just pieces of, why is building performance standard a positive thing? We get both sides of the coin. We obviously have these discussions with our clients all the time. This is not a one size fits all, depending on where the building is located. And maybe, we'll talk more about the fine structures and everything associated with that. But obviously looking at the whole picture, there is positive sides to building performance standards. One of the key things you see here too, 98% of the companies in the S&P 500 do publish sustainability reports, or ESG is a very big focus of that. And 2/3 of Fortune 500 companies also have one climate or clean energy target. So building performance standards aside, this all plays into that ESG sustainability side that these major companies are pushing, and it's going to be happening all across the country. And we'll touch on the map a little bit later. that shows really where that's focusing, and you'll understand what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think from a financial perspective, really the efficiency premium there is pretty important. And if your operating costs are lower, that means your net operating income of the property is higher, which means your building is valued at a higher rate. So right there's an economic benefit to having an energy efficient building. And I find this investor demand is also very interesting, that even with the current administration, people are not stopping doing what they're doing. I mean, the Fortune 500 companies, everyone is very, very up on what's happening and are continuing to march down that road rather than deviating. I think everyone realizes that having an energy efficient building, because of that lower operating costs and the increase in value, makes sense, economic sense. So why not do it?
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more as well with their clients. You know, there are going to be the clients that are going to say, this is just to check the box and they don't care.
Yeah.
But in reality, the value is there no matter who's paying the utility bills.
Yep, and we see that. I mean, I think that that's representative by the fact that the big companies are still focused on it, right?
Yeah.
And Europe, investors in Europe, everyone does see. It doesn't make sense to waste money. That's the whole thing. That's the bottom line. If you're wasting energy, you're wasting money.
You can either put it to your bottom line or you can pay the utility. It's up to you.
Yeah, exactly. Let's support the utilities.
Yeah. Go ahead. All right, so everybody wants to know, where is this coming from? I think I mentioned it earlier, you know, cities, states, whatever, who's pushing this forward? What is the driving action? What is the driving policy behind these building performance standards? So a lot of different bubbles here on the screen, and you can see that, you know, it doesn't tie into one said bubble. You know, city, state, climate action goals, obviously that's a big one. Evolving office environment, tenant priorities, green leases, ESG, I touched on that. All of these things are important, and it depends on who is, you know, from the building owner and manager side, really looking at this, but also from the city state side, you know, they don't just make this stuff up. So there are typically working groups that come into play. There is back and forth. There is draft guidance that comes out, and feedback groups from you know, building owners and managers and property management companies that do feed into these building performance standards prior to them getting, you know, written as the letter of the law per se. So all of these bubbles definitely have a say in where this action is developed. And I think again, it's not one set bubble, but we can look at this and say, you know, it is a big piece of where we're going to see this all across the country. It's really not going to change, and I think you already mentioned it too. It's not going to go away depending on who is president or who is your governor or who is your, you know, mayor. Yeah. This is something that's going to stay, and it's just a matter of what piece of this flow chart is going to push it forward.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to say here too is that ultimately it's the building owner's responsibility to provide this data for these compliance reports. So the fact that you had mentioned earlier too, Tyler, was the triple net lease or the green lease is a very important part of this. And again, going back to imt.org, that organization Tyler mentioned, they have a great section on green leases, because when you think about it, if you're trying to meet the demands of reducing carbon in your building and you have a triple net lease, who's going to pay for that, right? Is it the owner because it's their building and they're responsible, or is it the tenant because they're the one using the energy on that meter? And so that green lease is going to become even more important right now, and also to get that utility data. So that's something to consider, and imt.org does have some examples in there. And I did want to mention the IRA here. So the Inflation Reduction Act, which is what President Biden had put into play back at the end of 2023, 22 actually, that's still in play. I mean, a lot of those tax benefits are going to go away for residential right now with the big beautiful bill, but the commercial side of that for federal solar and battery tax deduction, tax credits, and also tax deductions, we're going to talk about one of them, are still in play. They have not been put on the chopping block. So that's something else to consider to help you meet these goals. there are funds from the federal government at this time to help pay for some of that.
And to your point on green leases too, what we see on that is more often than not, the most successful ways that we're navigating that, like an example is, Denver, Colorado, Xcel Energy, they do have substantial incentive programs and whatnot. If you have a building that's, very heavily tenant occupied, and, who's, again, to your point, who's going to be responsible for navigating this? Like, well, I'm not, these are 100% tenant occupied or 75% tenant occupied. We pay very little. Why? Who's going to pay for this? Xcel Energy does, the direct install program and other programs that help with, okay, let's do LEDs and aerators and stuff like that, or incentives or rebates to help push the tenants to, push this forward. Whereas otherwise they wouldn't care, or they're not going to spend their own money to do it, right?
Yeah.
We do see that too.
Yeah, you do. Okay, so let's look at this compliance roadmap. What's going on?
Yeah, so I think the IMT, what we talked about earlier, and we're going to show two maps here. Where does this policy come from? What is this? What has built this, and what is going to continue to build this and push this forward as we start seeing this more and more in the future years, right? So it's not something that is going to go away, but I need to actually pause and close my window. If you want to take this, because
I'll take it. Okay, so let's talk about this. So these BPS laws have two phases. All right, that's the most important part to reflect on here. And this map is the first phase. These are the benchmarking laws, which is the Energy Star benchmarking that is required to be able to produce the energy metrics that are then going to guide how you respond to the BPS requirements. At first, these maps were very light, and now, as you can see, they are growing. I mean, there are a lot of, if you look at the different colors, green is benchmarking required for public and commercial buildings. Orange is benchmarking required for public, commercial, multifamily. The blue ones, I think, are interesting because those are the ones that we're kind of talking about, which have additional actions required for public and commercial buildings. Those are the ones with the BPS, and also the purple, where you have benchmarking and additional actions required for public, commercial, and multifamily buildings. So these are all ones that require benchmarking as the beginning stage in the compliance world.
And what I mentioned earlier too, what we saw on that is the whole driving force behind building performance standards really originated with benchmarking. And so once they have the data for benchmarking, a great example is California, Colorado, Washington State. Then they actually have that data to base their building performance standards off as they start pushing that ball forward. And so when we start looking at these states, in the next map we're going to show, it's going to be really evident why this has been built into the next map. So I'll take that.
Phase.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But as a refresher for everyone who doesn't understand what benchmarking is, let's just take a quick look at this. This is a progress and goals report that comes out of the EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager software. This is what's used for benchmarking. It is a software that takes different buckets of information, 3 different buckets, and with that information, if accurately entered, it can produce these various metrics. And I kind of view it as like a financial statement for the building. It gives you some really good insight as to what's happening. The Energy Star score, which is a 1 to 100 ratio, as you can see there, this building is a 73. And you can see where it trends too with the different baseline ending 23 to 24. When we started benchmarking, there's a percentage change, and you can also put in a target of where you're trying to get to. There's also a national median, which is a CBUC study. It's a little bit old. It's 2013 data. But then also, if you had a building of Energy Star score of 75, where your metrics landed. Now, the Energy Star score is really a descriptor of how your building and its building use. This is a distribution center. There are about 80 different uses in the software. How your use compares to all the other similar use buildings in the software. There's an adjustment for weather normalization for zip code. So that's kind of look at how my building use is comparing to everybody else that's reported in the software. So it's kind of interesting to see that. Now, what's the next section gets into energy, and there's a site EUI and a source EUI calculation that the software does. The site EUI, which is an energy use intensity, is used in a lot of the reduction performance requirements that we're going to be getting into. So I want to just explain what that is, because it is important to understand that. So what the software does is it takes the electricity, which is at kWh, and the gas, which is at therms, if the building has both, and it converts them both to kBTU, which is a UK measure of energy. It adds them together because they're both using energy in the building, and then it divides it by the square footage of the building. So it's an overall energy use on a square foot basis. The lower, the better in this case. And the Energy Star score, as we said, it was 1 to 100, 100 being the best, the higher the better. So the site EUI is the lower the better. So you're looking at a square foot number of how the building is performing, and you can look at it historically. You can see what's going on historically, and it's kind of interesting to see. The source EUI, which I just want to mention, also same basic calculations, taking that site energy use intensity, but it's also picking up, as the word source defines, the distribution losses that are coming from the grid to the transformer and then being used by the site. It's always 2.5 to 3 times more than the site EUI. And it's some part of it is you really can't control that because it's coming off the grid, but that is how the city of LA is looking at its BPS, its second phase. But like we were looking at Denver and some of the other ones, they are looking at the site, which is just the building itself. This report also provides GHG emission analyses and also water if you put water in. So you can kind of see trending wise what's going on with your building. Also, if you do retrofits, you can see the reductions or the increase in scores. So it's really a good way, if it's completed, if the benchmarking is done accurately, to really see where you're heading with your building.
And that last key point, we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Being done accurately is extremely important when we talk about energy benchmarking. When we start establishing these building performance standards and the requirements and your targets as we move forward into the next 3, 5, 10 years, depending on what ordinance we're talking about, if we're guiding off of incorrect data, then we start having problems. But we'll dive into that in a bit here. So that's really good information.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about that being the data verification piece, because interestingly, I looked at Santa Monica and West Hollywood, which are new ones coming online, and they both are requiring data verification. And also, I think another one that I was looking at. So, that's somebody checking that, making sure that data is accurate. Because in the past, you could just submit it and no one cared, but now actually you have to have it.
That's the matter. Yeah.
Yeah, it matters.
No longer can you have your 15-year-old office intern doing it. That doesn't work well for you.
Give it to somebody who says they're going to do it for free.
Yeah.
We'll do it for free and $100 and it's going to be right. No, it's not going to be right. Sorry,
Absolutely.
It's not going to be.
Absolutely. All right. So the meat of what we're talking about here, we showed that original map. This one is really starting to push this forward. We're seeing on this map the building performance standards, both existing and emerging. Now, how accurate is this map today? Hopefully pretty accurate. Has it changed? It's going to change. They're continuing to update it. This is as of April 2025. So, again, it's a moving target, but IMT does a pretty good job of keeping up on this. You will see across this that past is a green, right? So a lot of green dots, but a couple green states as well. So states, the state of Colorado, the state of Washington Clean Buildings Act, state of Oregon, but then all the green cities across the country that already have building performance standards in place, all different. They all have different standards and what they push forward and what is required. Some are, not as stringent in fines. Some are very stringent in fines. But the other key thing is you see the blue dots, and the blue dots in the blue states have, already said building performance standards are important, and they're continuing to try to push that legislation forward. make the changes, get the working groups together, get the feedback from key people in whatever area it's in, and these are going to start developing. Are some of them going to drop off? Maybe. Are some of them going to get added? Also a maybe. But it is a moving target. But what we can see is there are a pretty large amount of green dots or on this map, and those are the ones we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and just a few of them to show you kind of how they work and discuss them a little bit more in depth. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I just find every time I look at this map, it's more dots. So
Yeah.
it's not like the dots are going down, the dots are going up. So I think that's really interesting. You can see Santa Monica and West Hollywood, the ones I was mentioning, they're on here now. So it's interesting, and I was a part of both of those stakeholder groups. I was asked to contribute my knowledge, and there's a lot of, one of the interesting parts of this was the data part of it is that the later you start gathering your data, the utilities might not give all that historical data that you need. So that was
Right.
one of the issues with Santa Monica and West Hollywood, is setting it up so you can make sure that people have that historical data. Because if you don't have it, then it's hard to see if you're going to have any reductions because you don't have where you started. So that's just an important note with all of these, is the later you start to gather the data, the less likely you have all the data that you need.
We've also seen that it depends, depending on the utility, but in the early stages of working in the, California ordinances and whatnot, SCE, PG&E, SDG&E, it was a lot harder to get to pull data. Xcel Energy, a great example in Colorado, very difficult to pull data in the early stages of these building performance standards. But then when they became more prevalent, when they started getting past moving from just benchmarking to actually having a larger requirement with targets, they made it easier. They made it easier to get whole property data, which was required, versus these, these dots over here in the other states where they're not as prevalent, and it is a little bit more difficult to pull data, or you might only get 1 year instead of needing 3 years. So it's going to be a changing landscape, but we do see as the adoption continues to increase, it does become easier.
Yes, it definitely does. But you have to start pulling it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the local ordinances and a couple examples. So we're going to talk just quickly about the city of LA, EVW, their phase 1, which has been in effect since 2018. It's all buildings over 20,000 square feet. They're focused on commercial, multifamily, industrial. They are pulling in energy, electric, gas, solar. If you have solar, you really do need to benchmark it. It is tricky. You have to have monitoring in order to gather that data, but it is important. And water data is also required here. Reporting entity is LADPS. Every year, June 1, the report's done. Required, there's some exemptions. And although the penalties are low here, $202 per year, I find that very ridiculously low. But anyway, the point I try and make on this one is the payment of non-compliance fees does not result in compliance, right? You can pay that fee. And it's a little bit scary, is that the city of LA reserves the right to further legal action if you do not comply. So that's just kind of hanging over you if you don't comply with this phase 1 of the city's ordinance. So the phase 2 of this, so the BPS here associated with, it's not really a fully BPS, but it's similar to it because it has requirements where you either meet certain exemptions, reductions in energy or water use, or you have to have an audit performed, an energy and or water audit. It's an ASHRAE level 2. We do have Tyler join us sometimes on those, on more complicated buildings. That's why we work with Abraxas. And this ordinance is this phase 2 is on a 5-year cycle. So it's based on the last digit that the building ID has. And that was a number that every building in the city received. So you can see right now the 8s and 9s are going to be reporting by the end of this year. So this is a way for people to understand how their buildings are performing, and if they're not performing well, they're required to have an audit completed so they can understand why is it not, and what can we do to make the building more energy efficient.
The one thing too about that I noticed about LA, again, I'm going to I'm going to probably butcher the timeline, but when they turned back on the requirements for post-COVID, right? So it went away and they turned it back on post-COVID. I specifically remember being on a meeting and somebody asked the question of, well, do I have to implement anything, right? And I think he said something along the lines of, we're not requiring people to do implementation. So that's your point of like, it's not really building performance standards, but we are hoping that people will be engaged enough to want to improve their efficiency of the building. So a lot of times when I'm talking to our clients about this, it's like, look, you're going to get a quality audit. You're going to get a quality report that shows you the energy and water usage and the audit and retrocommissioning opportunities that were found at your building. Do you have to implement anything at this time? No. But a quality audit is important because down the road, should this go the route that we think it's going to go, as a lot of the other building performance standards have gone, is it does turn into a, hey, you did benchmarking, or hey, you did an audit. Now you're going to get that audit and you're going to have to take action. We don't know if that's going to be the case with LA, but we do see that happening. Like we're going to talk about Colorado here in a bit, and Denver. That's been really the path that went. And so as we start seeing these building performance standards grow, LA is an example of, there's no action required post phase 2 at this time, but I don't have a crystal ball at this time, but we might see that in the future.
Yeah, but also if you don't do the retrofits that are recommended in the report, one, you might miss the opportunity for incentives that the utility offers right now. LADWP offers quite a bit of incentives, so you could get some money back in doing those retrofits. But also, if you don't do them in this 5-year cycle, if your score doesn't improve, you're going to have to pay for another audit again. So that just doesn't seem right to me. I'm encouraging people to spend the money and invest in their buildings so they can avoid that audit again in 5 years, but also reduce those operating costs, which is the key here.
All right, let's talk about Energize Denver. So Energize Denver, as we mentioned earlier, it's a site EUI program or a site EUI metric. We can talk a little bit about the fines, but let me go through the specifics of it. So this program is 25,000 square feet above. There are additional requirements below the 25,000 square foot threshold, a smaller scale, but I'm going to focus on the primary bulk of it all here. Commercial multifamily and what they call industrial or manufacturing agricultural and industrial is their term, which is MAI. They do have a benchmarking requirement, which is June 1st and annually. For this year specifically, or 2024, it is due in actually September 1st because they just rolled out a revised ordinance requirements, so they did push it back a little bit. The performance requirement, again, based off of the benchmarking data, as based off of their 2019 baseline. That baseline year can change, but they basically are setting the performance requirements for each building type, and then you have targets that you have to meet, and we'll go on that in the next slide if you want to go forward. The performance requirements, again, just changed, like literally this month, last month, excuse me. Originally were 2024 and 25. They changed from, and then 27 and 2030 being the final target. So those interim targets shifted a little bit, and then your final target moved out as well. So 24, 25, and what was 26 all moved to 28. The second interim target, 2027, was removed, and the final target was moved from 2030 to 2032. That aligns with what the MAI buildings targets were at 2028 and 2032 as well. So it's really easy to navigate that, whether you're a manufacturing, agricultural, and an industrial building or a commercial building. But the key thing here is what we saw also in the revised guidance that came out recently was a reduction of fines. But the fines for Denver are very, very substantial. So when we started talking, we talked earlier about LA, $202, whoop-de-doo. Doesn't get the juices flowing. Whereas Denver, we're starting to talk about, really, really large fines. But I will say with that, as we start talking about large fines, programs like Denver have really tried to make it easy and helpful for buildings to push this ball forward, to actually help them with compliance. Both Denver and Colorado, which we're talking about on the next slide, have said, make a path to compliance and work with us, and you won't see fines because they're not I've been on working groups with Denver, and they're not in the interest of fining building owners. They're not. That's not what they do. That's not their business. They want, buildings in the state of Colorado, and the state of, Colorado, the city of Denver. They want them to be vibrant and, keep the city and the state what it is. With that, a path to compliance for both Denver and Colorado is doing a national level 2 energy audit. Further to that point, the city of Denver right now actually has a pretty attractive rebate that can be up to $30,000 depending on your building size to help facilitate those energy audits. So, albeit one of the more aggressive programs, Energize Denver and Building Performance Colorado, you do have the opportunity within the city of Denver to get a pretty attractive rebate to help push you down that road and not pay as much for it. So it's one of the more robust programs, what we've seen in Energize Denver as well as Building Performance Colorado, but I think it's one of the better ones in that they do have a pretty good support program for it. They have really good working groups, great resources, help desks that you can contact, and we're starting to see that a lot with these programs that are successful and getting action. Mm-hmm. That is a key piece of it, is having that support from the city or from the state.
Well, and I think also having a good consultant, because with all these changes constantly happening, just reflective on this slide, if you're not paying attention and you're, oh, I don't have to worry about it, but really you do have to worry about it. So, tying in with a good consultant that actually is paying attention is going to be key.
We find ourselves more and more, I've done meetings where I've been on a meeting for an hour and they're like, you just educated us. I was like, that is my job. That's, what my job is. And, I have presentations that I, brush up and share. And I think being helpful is a lot of times people just get like proposals and, oh, here's a price. And, well, what does this mean? You're trying to sell to a person that their key job is not to do what we do. And so we want to try to be that resource to them to just inform them of what the requirements are. And if we don't do that, we're doing a disservice. So very true. A good consultant is very important.
Yeah.
Go to the next slide and we'll talk about Colorado. So Colorado, a little bit different in that there are different pathways, right? So the Building Performance Colorado has 2 different pathways. It's either a GHG pathway or an EUI pathway, similar to Denver, which is an EUI pathway. The difference is it's 50,000 square feet and above. All types of buildings are included except for a number of exemptions that are coming out: decentralized multifamily, storage facilities, standalone parking, airplane hangars, in a building that has more than 50% MAI. So that's an MAI term we talked about earlier: manufacturing, agricultural, industrial. They can be exempt. And then buildings with no heating and cooling. So anybody outside of that is over 50,000 square feet has to meet these requirements. Very similar to Denver is the benchmarking deadline that's due annually in June 1st, and then the GHG pathway or the EUI pathway. There is some new guidance coming out, and I was going to talk about it here, but I'm going to forego that because I want to make sure that we don't say something that's not going to be correct once they release new guidance. But keep in mind that, if you do have a building that is in Colorado that also has to comply with Denver, those are 2 different programs, 2 different dates, 2 different things that we can navigate. But in the recent guidance that was released, if you are in compliance with Denver, and you have a building that's also in Colorado, which it is, then you are in compliance. That is what they're saying now. June 1st deadline, we'll see what happens when they actually release it. The other thing I'm going to highlight here is the fines. So you do see a fine structure a little more simplified. It's not based on EUI, it's a flat fine. But for both of these properties, or for both of these ordinances, excuse me, the penalty doesn't get you off. You're not out of jail. You still have to do it. You will continue to get fined. Just because you say, fine, I'll just pay the, what is it? Like almost $60,000 in fines. And I'll just be done instead of improving my building to meet these targets. It doesn't work like that. You'll continue to get the fines. And that's why I mentioned on the previous slide, path to compliance gets you down the road to where they're going to say, okay, you're working towards a path. That's great. We're not going to fine you. Show us that you're doing that and you'll be okay. So really important to highlight that.
It's not going away again, if we're going to talk about it, right? It's
We could keep
definitely,
saying that. Yeah, we could keep saying that.
you
So
can't get away
another
from
one.
it. It's coming.
Another one, very similar. Again, this is a GHG emissions pathway for both Denver and BERDO, which Boston's program. They've done a really good job, and I think we're going to show it on the next slide, of having the resources and the data to support building owners and managers trying to figure out where they're at. So you can go online and you can see where you're actually tracking. Denver has a new portal they rolled out, and it's going to be even more and more robust, where building owners and people like us supporting building owners can log into. Boston has that as well, and we'll show it on the next slide. But again, benchmarking requirement, GHG targets trending towards zero emissions by 2050. So we're not talking about a 2030 guideline or a 2032. This is a long-term goal. Shows you this isn't a we're going to check the box and just be done. This is a 2050. We're talking, 25 years down the road. And so building owners can't just be like, I'm going to do an audit and be done, or I'm going to submit a benchmarking report and be done. This is something that we're going to have to continuously work with our clients on to make sure we're getting them towards where they need to be. These building performance standard deadlines, 5-year compliance cycles beginning in 2025, and then it tiers from there. And I'll show you that on the next slide. You'll see here too the penalty for non-compliance. So again, $150, $300 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start saying per day, emission standards, 300 to 1,000, per day, then those numbers start to add up.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to also mention here is, what does that mean of reducing your GHG emissions targets towards net zero? Is really eliminating gas out of your building, right? Which is called electrification. And that's going to be one way to get rid of those emissions, but also reducing waste, right? So how do you get rid of any waste that's happening? Your building is operating when no one's in there. You have fluorescent lighting that doesn't have sensors, so the light's on. All of that waste has to be eliminated to get down to that net zero emission level, because you can't be using energy and creating emissions and meet that. So it's really electrification and reducing waste, and then bringing in renewables as well.
So in the interest of time, I want to try to go over these next two slides pretty quickly, but this is highlighting the Boston calculator. So on this calculator, you can see a property that's taking no action, done anything, just not happening, right? The Boston calculator does a really great job of showing what that is going to potentially look like. On the right-hand side, you see that red box. Those numbers add up quick. Right now, they're fine, 2025, 2030. But then when we start getting towards the target where they're having to reduce it and they're not making any action, then the numbers start to get really, really big. We were going to show a Colorado one or a Denver one as well, but that's getting changed, so I didn't want to show that. It's not accurate. But you can see, again, you can either pay a couple $100,000 or you can take action in your building. Go ahead to the next slide. So the BERDO calculator is really cool, in that I find it cool because
I love this too. I love this.
My industry. So,
I love it also, and it's got, the fact that it's got the LED retrofits and the kitchen electrification. I mean, and those are two things, especially in a hotel, right, that is super important. And I would think that lighting retrofit includes sensors, occupancy sensors, and things like that. But you can see the savings that occurs when you install. Those are simple. These are that's like a low-hanging fruit. Every building should have a lighting retrofit.
Yeah, so with this tool, what they've done is they've allowed to, have a building owner or a manager, if you want to engage a consultant in the preliminary phase, or you want to do back of the napkin math to say, what would an LED retrofit save me? What would an electrification project save me? How much is that going to move the needle? You can do this yourself. Or again, step one, get an energy audit. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah. That is interesting. I do like their approach here.
Yeah.
Okay, there's some money. I wanted to note that also in that slide, it showed that 2035, I think, is when those big fines started coming in. So one thing to consider, see, it says 2035 is when the fines are coming. So think about that when we go into this next slide. So what I look at always is I'm very up on, we try and spend a lot of time on looking at whether there are utility incentives, like Tyler had mentioned that Excel Energy over in Denver has some really good incentives. Always take advantage of those if you can. Delaying, so you can lose some of those. I mean, Edison had a bunch of incentives in LA. they're zero now, pretty much zero. So anyone who didn't do the retrofits then, it's gone. They're not available. So that's just something to always consider as those utility incentives. But I'm also very up on this tax deduction, which I had mentioned is not on the chopping block, and I think is so worthy of looking at. We've had several clients that have been able to take advantage of this. So what it is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's for new construction and retrofits. It is called the Section 179D tax deduction. So it's coming off your income of your property, which like a depreciation or any other kind of deduction to get to your adjusted gross income. And from that is what your taxes are calculated on. Then you have a tax liability. Now that tax liability would be affected by solar projects or PV projects, because those are, battery storage projects, those are deduction, those have tax credits. So those are coming off that tax liability. This is off the income of the property to come to that adjusted gross income. It is for, as I mentioned, energy efficiency retrofits. If you're doing a major modification in your building, it's a great idea to look at it, and or for new construction. It's a tax deduction based on a certain amount of energy savings. They're calling it efficiency gain over a baseline, which we're going to get into. There is an apprenticeship hour prevailing rate increase if you do follow that, and if you have to, which the deduction is then 5 times more. So it can be quite significant. There's this great sweet spot that we were able to find for a client of ours. Is if a project started prior to January 1st, 2023, but it was under continuous construction and completed after 2023, there's the prevailing bonus rates apply, and there's also an inflation factor. So it was $5 times 65 cents per the square footage of the building, so it's quite a deduction. The building types that are covered: commercial, residential, multifamily has to be 4+ stories, government, nonprofit owned, houses of worship, tribal. These are great. Almost all kinds of buildings can take advantage. Who can take it, which is also new, was the property owner, but the design team. So if you're working for a nonprofit, the design team, mechanical engineers, architects could take that deduction for you, and the REITs. So that's a big change that wasn't there before. So this is a way to save money on your taxes by doing the retrofits. Let's look at the next slide. So the way it's calculated is it's determined by an energy model. So the energy model is done. It's kind of creating in software what your building is currently, the shape and everything, and it's looking at that baseline. So right now, why I wanted to talk about that date of 2035 is right now there's this point until 2027 of this year where the baseline standard for that energy model is ASHRAE 90.1 2007. ASHRAE is the standard by which buildings operate, and it's 2007. Now that's fluorescent lighting, old school, compared to what in the energy model, what you're putting into your building right now. Almost every project we've looked at is in that 50% efficiency gain over baseline, which is pretty good. So at a non-prevailing wage, not sweet spot, it's $1 plus inflation times the square footage of the property. And if you're using bonus, meaning prevailing wage, there's a bonus rate, or if it's a sweet spot, it's $5 times the square footage of the property. Now, what's going to happen in 2027 is that ASHRAE baseline increases to 2019 compared to what you're putting in the building now. You might end up 35%. So not at that 50%. So if you're considering capital investments and you know that you have a BPS coming down, take advantage of this right now, because it's going to be really advantageous to you on your tax return, because you're going to have this tax deduction. And as I had mentioned, that 2035, this law as it stands right now expires in 32. So there's a window of opportunity that I see through beginning of 27, where if you're going to do retrofits, major modifications, it's better to do them now so you can take advantage of this tax deduction. And also consider that, in fact, as building, your cost of energy is continuing to rise, so it makes sense to do it sooner than later. So another way, what we always think of is how do people afford these investments in their properties. And one approach is PACE financing, which is property assessed clean energy. We thought we'd mention it. It's good for your retrofit. It could be part of your capital stock. It's for seismic retrofits as well. Basically means that you put no money out. All the retrofits and for a retrofit and the seismic can all be bundled up into a loan. And it's basically an assessment that lands on your property taxes. It's off-bill financing. The terms can be 10 to 30 years. It depends on the PACE lender. It does transfer with the real estate, so that might be easy or not, but either way, it does stay with the property. The one big hurdle is the current lender must approve PACE as the first position, but this is a great way to get your building, as I see it, you get your building completely upgraded, you meet all these BPS, you get it certified, it's magnificent, then you sell it and the debt goes to the new owner. But they also have really low energy costs, so great. All right,
So we are
key
going to run a
takeaways,
little,
right? We got six
Yeah.
minutes.
we are going to run a little bit long, but I think we're going to get down to the meat of it here and run away. Show you guys the key takeaways and what everything we talked about, how we've performed this across the country for different building performance standards and what's important to it, right? So what we find, and we've already talked about it multiple times, is start with correct data. Start with correct data. Engage a third party to fine tune the data. Use somebody that understands it, because if you're working from wrong data and you're thinking, I use the goalpost analogy, right? So if you think, oh, my goalpost is here, and all of a sudden the data is incorrect, and you get down to a performance year and you have to have third party data verification, or you think you're on track and maybe you aren't and you have to pay a fine, or maybe you were a long time ago and you spent a bunch of money you didn't need to spend. That's very important. So understand the data, get somebody to do it correctly, engage a third party in the beginning, not when it's too late. I think that's number one thing. You mentioned it, and I've said it to all our clients, use us early on, right? It's important. Understanding building performance. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, understanding those metrics, I mean, are very important. That, like that progress and goals report, is really important to see where you are right now. And I think one other thing is that all these BPS and benchmarking laws are looking at aggregate data, which means whole building data. It's not just the common area. It's not just the tenant data. When you have both, it's the aggregate. So you're looking at everything that's being consumed in that building. And it's important to make sure that all of that is captured and that the data validating that, there's a meter list that come from some of the utilities and documentation that needs to be saved. So when you have that third party verification, it's right there. You're ready to go. Hey, here you go. Here's the data. We know we captured all 81 meters for an 80 unit apartment building with one common area, right? That's important because sometimes the addresses are on the other street. And if they're not captured, your data is undervalued and you're going to have a problem. But calculator too, understand and calculate where you're going to be. Audit, very important. Those existing conditions, understanding what they are. It's also a great historical report on what you have at that point in time. And you've got to review the data, right? Review those reports. I meet with a lot of our clients and review what the report showed, so they actually understand it. It's not just they get a report and nobody cares. No, let's dig deep into it. I really enjoy that part in helping educate people to understand what their options are.
And what we actually do, so we do an audit, and we call it a debrief. You can call it an energy action plan, and that moves into the next phase. So you can deliver a stack of paper to anybody, right? But then if they don't do anything with it, or they don't understand it because that's not their bread and butter, then it doesn't serve them any value. So when you talk about, you get an audit and you do a debrief, or we do an energy action plan, it's going to them and saying, okay, well, we found these 13 measures or 13 projects at your facility, property, and here's where you're going to be at to meet your 2025, 2030, 2050, whatever goal. Meeting with them to help them through the project construction, the project management, and understanding what resources they have in-house or what resources we can bring to the table to help them get there. Further taking them to, like, not just delivering a stack of paper, but being a resource to them, but then even using that to be able to work with them to understand, okay, if you pick these 5 measures, where are you going to be at in terms of meeting your target or your interim target, or what sort of other resources are you going to have to pull from? Are you going to have to purchase RECs? Are you going to have to do a timeline adjustment to get more time because you're not going to replace a boiler that's only 5 years old, or you have financial constraints? All of those things to understand come in that implementation phase when we work with clients. And it goes into that next phase too, where it's the planning phase, understanding capital budgets and incentives, which you talked about. I think that's it. All kind of ties together. This whole package, the key takeaways is putting it all together.
Yeah, and I think that the thing right now in all of this is, as I would view it, if I have a commercial building that's located in any of those benchmarking or BPS locations, immediately start benchmarking it. Even if, let's say, the deadline, it's not even due for another year or so, get the data, make sure it's accurate, have it coming into Energy Star, and then you have this time to develop this capital budget, right? You know what's going on. You can do metering, you can do audits, whatever it is, to identify what really does need to be replaced, and taking advantage of those incentives, right? Utility incentives are super important to help you reduce the costs, and also these tax opportunities that are currently, they're still around. So why not take advantage of them and lower the cost of that project?
Yeah, absolutely. And look at that, we ended right on the hour with time for questions. Not really.
Not really.
Well, thank you, Marika and the Green Economy team, for putting this together. My contact information is on the screen. I know yours is. I don't know if we have questions, but I will say my information is there if you guys wanted to reach out directly. If anybody has any questions or we want to facilitate any additional discussion, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, I think starting sooner than later is probably the best approach here, and putting your head in the sand is probably the worst thing you can do, because you need the data.
I 100% agree. I think you and I both have said it a number of times. It's take action. Don't do the head in the sand method. Get the data, understand where you're at. Do nothing is probably the worst thing.
Yeah. Don't want to do that. And we work together. So Tyler and we do a lot of work together. He performs some of our audits for us, and that's why we're on this webinar together, because we are partners. And so you can reach out to either one of us, and we're happy to help you navigate this future of benchmarking and BPS. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.